When you think of a radioactive wasteland, what do you think of? Maybe the Fallout games. Maybe North Korea after America sends their bombs of freedom. Maybe Chernobyl. I'm willing to bet Chernobyl is pretty high up on most people's lists of radioactive wastelands. You know that Soviet nuclear power plant that went in a meltdown in 1986? That has a strangely popular touristy vibe to it now? You might have heard that that's the most radioactive place on the planet. Well, you were lied to. Although I'm sure the elephant's foot radioactive blob in the basement of the reactor might technically be the most radioactive place. If you're going by areas that you could actually go to, Semipalatinsk is much worse. In eastern Kazakhstan, there's an old Soviet military base known as Semipalatinsk, and it is the most radioactive place in the world. Now, nuclear bombs, even ones made nowadays, don't leave radiation behind too long. Places like Hiroshima and Nagasaki are once again bustling metropolises. The reason Chernobyl is so radioactive has nothing to do with nuclear bombs. It's because a nuclear reactor meltdown spews much more fallout than a nuke ever will. But there was no nuclear power plant at Semipalatinsk, and the reason Semipalatinsk is so radioactive is because of nuclear bombs. 456 of them. And those bombs left behind more fallout than the 4,500 Hiroshima bombs. And that's a high enough amount that it actually does make an effect. But the sheer amount of fallout alone is not what makes this so scary. Semipalatinsk was where the Soviet Union tested a very good portion of their nuclear bombs. Despite the fact that they had Siberia, the definition of nobody lives here. Granted, Kazakhstan isn't exactly the most densely populated country in the world. But choosing Semipalatinsk was strange. The generals were told the area was uninhabited. It wasn't. Right outside of where the bombs were being tested was a city of 200,000 people. To put that into context, the city right outside of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, Pripyat, only had 20,000 people. There were 10 times more people in Semi than there were in Pripyat. And to make matters worse, Semi was never evacuated. This is because there was no big single event that would cause a freakout across the entire city. Instead, each bomb that was tested there would just add a little bit more fallout, a little bit more radioactivity, until you end up with an area more radioactive than Chernobyl. So speaking in terms of raw numbers and severity, Semipalatinsk was much worse than Chernobyl. A total of 1.5 million people saw some form of radiation poisoning. That was about a tenth of the entire population of Kazakhstan at the time. And people are still being affected to this day, as Semi has still never been evacuated. And people are still being affected to this very day, as Semi is still a bustling city. As a matter of fact, it's a city that's grown. Ever since the Soviets stopped testing nukes and the collapse of the USSR, Semi has seen 100,000 new people make their way to town. Some of these have been farmers from the outlying areas coming to the city for economic opportunities, and others have just been general population growth of people having babies. And the people who live in Semi can't realistically leave. It's one of the poorest regions in Kazakhstan. The people who live there can't afford to move. Because of this, there's a decent-sized city in Kazakhstan that's effectively a radioactive, I wouldn't say wasteland, but that's dangerously radioactive that isn't going anywhere anytime soon. Don't mind me, I've only been busy for like the last month between school and work. Hopefully I can get back into the groove of things here, because I got a lot of video topics in the works. But until then, I suppose stick around, subscribe, like if you haven't done so. The more views and interactions I get on this video, the more it is other people can learn from these, and by subscribing, you will make sure you don't miss any more of my future videos.